So, data center. Data center, is made up of these physical machines. It's made up of machine virtualization. Infrastructure hosting was something that the early cloud did. And services such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, all part of services that are offered inside of the data center. Now, containers are really there for the purposes of developers' operations, but they're really kind of cool. They're really awesome. So container during the runtime. So there we have a Windows server and a Linux box. And then you have these container images. Now think of it this way. You know how you have in a virtual machine, you have the entire operating system that you're able to interact with. And the operating system, when you interact with it, you're remoting into it, you are using it as a web server, as a database server, as an application server. You're using it as a physical machine without any trouble. Well, think of a container as a mini virtual machine, if you will. And here's what happens. The container has this image repository, if you will, in the Windows arena, for example. You can create a container on the Windows OS itself, or you can create a container inside of HyperV. This is all going to sound very trivial at first, but it's going to make a lot more sense when I demonstrate it to you and as I walk you through this. So think of it this way. Windows Server 2016 has a core operating system. There's some pieces of the operating system that are critical to the OS. Graphical interface is not one of those critical components. You agree? Right? The graphical interface is not one of those critical components. So if you take the Windows Server 2016 OS and you break it down to its bare minimum, if you will, you end up with the pieces that you need in order to be able to install applications. Let's say you are working with SQL Server. Let's say you're working with .NET code or Java code or web server. You create a container that has those pieces. So here's a container runtime. You have your physical host, your Windows Server 2016 machine, the way I have it. And then you have Windows Server 2016 on top of it, the operating system itself. And then you have a bunch of images inside of this operating system, right? Or you have the operating system and then you have hardware virtualization. Well, that's Hyper-V, right? When you're virtualizing hardware, there's the hypervisor. And then you put, your VMs on there. And the VMs have the operating systems and the applications underneath it. So you have the physical system on the bottom. You have the operating system on top of it, such as Hyper-V. Maybe it's installed on bare metal. That takes care of the hypervisor or the virtualization. And on top of that, you have your virtual machines. And then you have your operating system images and so on. Right? You also have containers. Now, containers are really kind of awesome. In the operating system, you can create multiple containers. I can have a container, for example, for Windows Server, and inside of my Windows Server container, I can have a container for web server, for database server, for application server, for my product that I am developing, and there's a good reason to do this. And I can have hardware virtualization on the side, and I can install VMs on top of that as well, as you can see on the left. Think of this for a minute. Okay, you have the Windows Server in the local repository, and on the right-hand side, you have the container runtime. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you have the local repository, and on the right-hand side, you have the container runtime. In the middle, you have a container OS image, where the C Windows directory is, right? And what happens is, on top of that, I create what's called a sandbox, and sandbox is really nothing more than my developers area where I am testing some things out. I want to test out to see on top of my OS image, my bare OS image, my bare minimum OS image, I am trying to test out and see if something works. And I'm developing, let's say, SQL queries, or I'm developing some Java code or Node.js code, or really whatever I'm doing. There's Node.js in this particular example. So in the container view, I've got a Node.js directory. So look on the bottom. Look in the middle. I've got the container OS image that's got the Windows directory. And in my sandbox, or in my container image that I have, I have a C Node.js directory. The container view has the Windows directory and the Node.js directory. And don't worry, I'm going to demonstrate all of this to you, so it's going to make a lot more sense. Right now, it is all conceptual, and I understand if you're looking at this for the first time, it can be very conceptual. So in the Node.js, you have your application framework, which is really what you're building, and your local repository has the Windows server and your application framework in it. And you create something on top of that too. So you have the container image, then you have Node.js, and then on top of Node.js, you have another piece that is going to be my app. And we're just looking at it in terms of folders right now. Okay, so you have this my app image. So now you've got Windows, Node.js, and my app, which is another application. And in the local repository, I have the Windows server, I have the application framework, and on top of that, I've got my application. Okay, now this, for the development process, this is really kind of interesting because the people that are managing the Windows base, the container OS image, can manipulate the container OS image and don't have to worry about manipulating anything else. The people that are managing the application framework, the Node.js, can manage and manipulate the Node.js image. People that are writing the application can manage the application image. These three are, if you will, build on each other. I need the container OS image so that I can have the application framework so that I can have an application image. All three of those are required. So they're dependent on each other, if you will. Container image is the only thing that's not dependent on anything. So what happens is all of my developers that are developing these systems can grab Node.js from the pieces that they need so that they don't have to worry about updating Node.js. And here's the thing. When multiple developers are working on multiple systems, as we have today, you can create these container images and you can create these container sandboxes and you can build on them. Okay? Stay with me, okay? This is going to be a little bit different and not as clear until I show you what I'm talking about. So in the central repository, you have an application framework. So developers can choose the desired application framework and they can pull them locally from the central repository. Now this is something that Linux has had in its environment for quite some time, 5-6 years. Okay? And then required dependencies are automatically identified and pulled. So it says, oh, I'm going to grab the application framework. Oh, wait a minute. In order for me to grab the application framework, I need the Windows Server base OS. So it's going to grab that too. Now on top, developers can use the same programming languages in environments they're accustomed to. You don't have to code in something new. If you're used to C, C++, if you're used to Java, if you're used to SQL Server, it doesn't matter. You can continue doing work in the environment that you're used to. And then applications are compiled and assembled the same way. And then a new container image that contains the application written by the developer is created. And then the new application container image, it can be pushed to a central repository for it to be pulled by other developers. This is great for unit testing, to share your container images with other developers. It's great for staged integration for QA. Okay? So developers can build and test apps inside of containers using development environments, maybe such as Visual Studio, and operations that automate deployment, and they monitor deployed applications and such from a central repository. So containers are pushed, and they can be pushed to the cloud. They can be pushed to Hyper-V. They can be pushed to local instances. And the operations team can collaborate with developers to provide application metrics and insights. The operations would be the IT admin, if you will. Cloud will be the cloud, like Windows Azure. Containers being pushed to the central repository, that can be your data center, and developers can grab and communicate with all of this behind the scenes. Okay? Developers can keep updating and iterating and deploying updated containers so that everybody can pull them from a central repository. This all serves as a building block. Okay? So containers offer a very fast iteration because I am responsible for working with my piece of the equation. I'm going to manage the core. I'm going to manage the framework. I'm going to manage the application. I'm going to manage the updates, whatever the case may be. And everybody else can use whatever I have updated, and they can continue working with their system and working with their piece of the equation. It's really kind of cool. Right? They're ideal for distributed computing, databases, web, task scaling things out. Okay? So there are a couple of container operating systems on the Windows Server side. There's Nano Server, okay, which is really there for the purposes of the cloud. And then there's Server Core, which is what I will be showing you. And that's really great for our traditional apps. So Windows Server Container, okay, many different container runtimes, and HyperV Containers, right? So there's HyperV Containers and Windows Server Containers. I will be showing you Windows Server Containers. I don't have HyperV running in my case. Okay? The application framework can be distributed or grabbed from both locations. And then there are these tools. There's a Docker tool, PowerShell, and there are many others. I will be using PowerShell to create and construct these containers and show you how they're used as well. Okay? So deploying containers, you have a physical machine. You can choose to have Hyper-V virtual machines. You can have Hyper-V containers. You can have Windows Server Containers, which is what I have. I have Windows Server Containers. You can have, if you're using Hyper-V containers, you need a Hyper-V hypervisor. I don't have that running. I have Windows Server 2016 running. So you can have virtual machines. You can have Hyper-V containers in them. You can have Windows Server Containers in them. And then you can, of course, begin using them. Okay, so there are these, depending on what you're using, if it's going to be Windows Server or Linux or Microsoft Cloud, if it's going to be Azure on-premise, you're going to be using a service provider. And then container management tools, and I'm going to be using PowerShell for this purpose. And development environments, whatever development environment you work with, okay, to store the containers, right? So just choose your language, choose your fabric, choose your VMs if you're going to be using VMs, the different container technologies that are available, and then Microsoft Cloud. All right, so let me show you, without further ado, what these containers are and how these containers work. I've got a couple of things set up over here, and let me bring these up. So here, I've got a Windows Server 2016 machine that I don't have containers set up on. Now, I don't know about this. Do you know that Windows Server 2016, I've got Technical Preview 3, as you can notice here on the bottom right-hand corner. Do you know that it's preferred that you install Windows Server 2016 in command line or core mode? Desktop, Windows Server 2016 with the desktop is kind of a additional piece and is really there for backward compatibility. So if you don't know PowerShell or if you don't work with PowerShell, this is a good time to learn it. Here, you won't be able to escape it. All right, so let me show you how containers are created. So remember, when Windows Server is first installed, containers aren't installed. You have to actually get them. So I have opened up PowerShell, and I'm going to do wget URI HTTPS, and I'm going to go to aka.ms, and I'm going to grab the setup containers, and I'm going to store it in some container setup PS1. Okay, so I just got this file, cs.ps1, right there. And when I run this, it will begin to set up the container. Let me show you what's in it. It's kind of big. This is the wrong tool for it. No. Come on. There we go. Let me open this up. Let me open up the file. Go to the root directory. Open up cs.ps. There we go. Here's a file that I pulled out. And this is going to create the container. All I have to do is run it. Okay. Now, the process of this running takes a while. And what it does is it creates a virtual switch and it grabs the modules that are needed for me to work with the container. So let me show you all I have to do to run this. I just have to make sure that I'm inside of PowerShell in admin mode as an administrator. And I just type that, and there it goes. It begins to collect the data and create the process. I don't have to do anything from this point. Now let me show you what happens just so you can see as this is going on. So this starts the installation, and it will restart the machine, and it will grab the image, and it takes a while. And what I mean by a while is I have a 100 meg internet connection, and it does downloading of the Windows Server Core image, and it takes around a half hour or so to get this done. Okay, so there it is, and it's restarting. So I don't have to worry about that. Let me bring up my next machine that takes us right to where this is already installed. Okay, so on this machine, I have the container already installed, and the way I find out that it's installed, I type get command module containers. Okay, this is how you know that you have the container installed when you see the container source and you see all of these container commandlets. All right. Also, the other way you know is if you do get container image, you have the server core image. Okay. This is the only image that gets pulled down by that command that I told you about, container image. Okay, so it created this, it downloaded and installed this Windows Server Core, and it installed the Windows Server container, and I'm going to do get VM switch. Okay, it also created this virtual switch as well. Okay, that's been added. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do new container, and I'm going to name the container my first container, my first con. Maybe that's not a great word, huh? I'm going to say container image name is Windows Server Core. That's the only image that I have. And I'm going to do switch name, virtual switch. Okay, and okay, there you go. There is my container that I just created. Now what I have to do is I'm going to store this thing. I'm going to say con1 equals get container my first con1. Okay, so it's off. Now all I have to do is start it. Okay, so I'm going to do start container con1, and there it is, starting it up. Imagine this is like powering on a VM. Okay, this is like powering on a VM. Okay, it's done. Now when I do get container con1, come on, hello, get container. Okay, get container my first con. Okay, you can see that it's running. All right, if I do con1, you can see that it's running. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into it. I'm going to use enter PS session, that's remoting in, using container ID, con1 ID, run as administrator. And now I am going to remote into the container itself, which is really that core, that Windows core. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of a building block. I'm going to create, here I am in the container, and I know because of this container ID. Okay, that's the piece of the container ID. So I'm going to do a CD, and right in here, look, this is the container. Here's the IP address associated with it. And inside of the container, I can choose to, for example, ping Google, really whatever I want to do. Everything works. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory called utils. Oops. Utils. And in the utils directory, look, I created this utils directory off of the root. Okay. I'm going to go to the utils directory and I'm going to do hello world. I'm going to do out file hello txt. So there's my hello txt file. Let's say that's my program, right? Let's say that this utils directory is really my development directory, and let's say that this file or files or folders, I'm going to create another folder inside of here, make directory updates, change directory updates, and I'm going to do echo this is an update out file updates txt. Okay. Type updates txt. So there's my update. There's my updates directory. There's my hello.txt file. Like so. There's hello world that I put in. All inside of this image. Now, as I was saying about containers, I can build on this container. So how do I do that? Well, I'll show you. I'll show you how I can build on this container. Let me exit out of this container. And then let me stop this container. Okay, so the container is shutting down. When I do con 1, notice the container shut down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new image based off of that container. Okay, I want to build an image that is going to be based off of this container right here, so that the utils directory and the updates directory inside of that container are all part of it. Let's take a look. So right over here, I'm going to do new container image, container con1, name with code. Publisher myself, version 1.0.0.0. Okay, there it is. It's creating a container image, and it's going to call it with code, is basing it on this container, the one that I put the utils and the update directory in. Okay. So now let me clear this. Now when I do get container image, I see two of them. This is mine, and this is the one that was provided to me by Microsoft, the core. Okay. Then I'm going to create a brand new container using the image that I have. It's going to be very easy. I'm going to do new container name myctr2. Container image name with code, because that's the image that contains the utils directory and the updates directory underneath it. Okay. Switch name virtual switch. All right. It's creating the container. There you go. Now I'm going to do start container myctr2. There it is, powering it on. And when I go to the myctr2 container, I should have the utils directory, the updates directory in it. So now when I do enter ps session container ID, and I'm going to get the container called myctr2, get the ID of it, and I'm going to run as administrator. So once it enters a container, I'm going to check to see that the utils and the updates directory and my file that I specified is actually in there. Okay, there's the utils directory right there. There's the, oops, don't know how to type. Okay, don't look for it. I know it's not there. CD utils, and there's the utils directory, and updates, and the updates directory with the update file. Okay. And I can keep going and keep, using this as a building block. So I'm going to exit out of here. Now, furthermore, as I do this, I can continue to build on this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of how I can have a web server in there. Okay. And inside of this container, let me get in there. Enter PS session. Okay. So inside of this container, I can do invoke, don't know how to spell, web request, and I'm going to go to nginx, which is a web server, .org, download nginx -1.9.3.zip, out file, cngi and xzip. Okay, off it goes. Okay, so now I have this zip file right over here. Okay. So I'm building the container with a web server in it. Now what I'm going to do is I have to expand that zip file inside of my container. So right over here, I can say expand, archive, path, nginx .zip, destination, path C, force. There he goes, expanding it, and it created this directory right here, nginx -1 nginx -1.9.3. Okay, so there is the nginx. Okay. So I've got my container here with the web server in it. Now I'm going to exit. I'm going to stop the container, my CTR2, and I will continue to build on this. Okay, so from here, if I do get container, there's my CTR2 that I'm using the with code parent image. If I do get container image, I have the Windows Server Core, which came with the container as soon as I installed it, and then with code that I created that had the directory, the utils directory, and it had the updates directory. And then now I created my CTR2 off of with code, and now my CTR2 contains the nginx web server. So I'm going to create a brand new container image with that in it. So I'm going to do new container image, container name, my CTR2. I'm going to do web server. My CTR2. So that's the name of the container that I'm creating a container image from, and the name is going to be web server image. And I'm going to do publisher is going to be myself. Version is going to be 1.0.0.0. There you go, creating the container image that's got the web server in it. See when that gets done. Done. Okay, so that's got the Nginx web server in it. Get container image. Okay, there's a web server image. Right. Then once I have the container image, I can then do new container name web server container image web server image switch name virtual switch. Oops. Container image name. Container image name. Okay, there you go. So now I've got the web server image created. And I go through the same deal. I do a start container web server. There it is, starting it. And I can store it. Web server, get container web server. There it is. And then I can do enter PS session, container ID, web server ID, run as administrator. Okay. Here I am. I'm going to switch over to the Nginx directory, and I can start Nginx, the web server. And it's running. And that purpose is to have this nice ecosystem of these containers that others are building on. You see why these are little pieces now? And different people can manage different pieces of the container, bringing it all together to improve the development QA cycle. Okay? That's really what this is all about.